When I got to the church that morning, it was already half full. Old friends from Grandma's quilting club, cousins I hadn't seen since Mom's divorce, and 3 aunts sitting in the front pew like royalty in mourning. Everyone was in black except for the youngest, Aunt Sherry, who wore a lavender scarf because it's what Mom would have wanted. Grandma probably would have agreed. But still, the scarf irritated everyone. I slipped into the third row, behind a man who smelled like cologne and wood polish. No one turned around to greet me. That wasn't surprising. Grandma Eleanor had been the quiet center of our family. She wasn't warm, but she was steady. She didn't hug often, but she showed up, with soup, with advice, with envelopes of $20 bills tucked into birthday cards. The kind of woman who kept her Christmas lights white and her opinions to herself, unless you asked directly. I had loved her in the way I loved still water, cautiously, and with full awareness that silence could hold more than calm. The service started with a hymn I didn't know. The pastor, someone from Grandma's weekly bridge group, read a psalm and a half-hearted anecdote about her generosity. She always brought extra cupcakes, he said, though I couldn't remember her baking a day in her life. After the final prayer, people swarmed the front pew. My aunts cried with the coordination of theater kids, passing tissues, leaning into each other like a scene from an old movie. I stayed back. I knew better. As people began filing out, a few distant cousins nodded at me politely. One, Amy, who lived in Charlotte and ran a boutique dog collar business, gave me a tight-lipped smile and muttered, "You holding up okay, Claire?" "I'm fine," I said. That was mostly true. I hadn't cried yet. Not when the hospice nurse called me, not when I saw Grandma's handwriting on the deceased certificate, not when I packed the last of her flannel nightgowns into a donation box. Grief, for me, had always been slow-moving, heavy, like a stone in my jacket pocket I couldn't put down yet. But what I didn't expect, what hit harder than the service or the sad casserole waiting at the reception, was the way Aunt Diane looked at me as I walked past her in the parking lot. Not grief, not exhaustion, but something sharp, accusatory. I paused. "You okay?" She tilted her head. "Shouldn't I be asking you that, Claire? Or are you feeling pretty good today?" "I don't follow," I said. She smiled, the tight kind. "You will." I let that hang. The reception was in the fellowship hall. Rows of folding tables, plastic tablecloths, the smell of mayonnaise and sadness. I poured myself bad coffee and tried to blend in. Grandma's neighbor, Mr. Parker, came over to shake my hand and told me, "She always said you were the quiet one, but the steady one." I nodded. Then I heard it. Soft, like someone didn't want it to spread too far yet. "She changed it after that phone call. I don't care what the lawyer says." I turned. 2 women, one with her hand pressed to her chest, whispering over potato salad. My heart flicked. I moved slowly toward the back hallway, where the coats were hung, and fished my phone from my purse. I had 3 missed calls, one from the estate lawyer's office. My chest tightened. I hadn't expected anything complicated. Grandma's will had been written years ago, she told me herself. Everything split evenly between her 3 daughters. I was barely mentioned. That had never been a sore spot, not really. I understood my place in the family. Not unloved, just unneeded. But something was off now. As I turned to head back into the main room, Aunt Sherry grabbed my arm. "I hope you're ready," she said, voice low. "For what?" Her eyes narrowed. "To explain yourself." She let go and walked away before I could say anything else. That was the moment I realized I hadn't just lost my grandmother. I had inherited a war. My full name is Claire Lynn Archer. I'm 32 years old. I work as an archivist for the County Historical Society, a job that sounds like it belongs in an old film reel, but mostly involves scanning brittle documents and cataloging local ephemera no one else thinks to preserve. I live alone in a modest second-floor walk-up 2 blocks from the library. My life is quiet, not glamorous, but it's mine. And for most of it, I had existed on the perimeter of my own family. I'm the only child of the middle daughter, Maureen, who moved 3 states away when I was 12, and then quietly dropped out of every holiday gathering until her name was used more as a cautionary tale than a memory. My aunts, Diane, the oldest, and Sherry, the youngest, stayed close to Grandma Eleanor. Geographically, emotionally. They hovered, they helped, they hosted. And they reminded everyone of it, constantly. That didn't leave much room for me. I was always Maureen's girl, or Eleanor's little helper, depending on who was talking. I came to visit once a month, did the yard work when no one else wanted to, fixed the beeping smoke detector in the hallway, set up Grandma's email. Nothing grand, just things that needed doing. But no one asked me what Grandma and I talked about during those visits. Or how she started waiting for me at the front window. How she'd save little newspaper clippings she thought I'd like. Or how, when her hands got shaky, I'd read aloud from her favorite mystery paperbacks while she sat in the corner chair with her tea. There wasn't some dramatic breakthrough. No tearful confession, no whispered regrets, just time. Hours accumulated between us, like layers of paint, quiet and deliberate. She never said she loved me more than the others, but sometimes she'd hold my hand when she didn't need to. That was enough. Then 4 weeks before she died, she called me. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I was labeling a box of Post with 2 local recipes at work. The call came through around 10:45 a.m. She sounded lucid, clear, even upbeat. "I need to ask you something, Claire." "Of course," I said, immediately putting the box down. "If something were to happen to me soon, and I'm not saying it will," she added quickly, "would you be able to keep the house?" I blinked. "What? I mean, would it overwhelm you? The maintenance, the taxes, the loneliness." I paused. "I don't know. I'd figure it out." She exhaled. "That's what I thought." We didn't talk about it again. She died 11 days later. The day after the funeral, I met with her lawyer, Mr. Levine. He looked tired, worn out in that specific way estate attorneys get when families circle like sharks. He didn't waste time. "Ta-da! She changed the will last month," he said, sliding a copy across the table. "Filed it with me directly. No family members involved, no coercion. All proper channels followed." I looked down. It was clear as daylight. The new will left the house paid off, modest, 2-bedroom colonial on Cherry Avenue, to me. Everything else remained split between her daughters. No dramatic upheaval. Just one sentence, handwritten in the margins and signed, "Claire Lynn Archer to receive full deed and ownership of property at 74 Cherry Ave." I stared at it. "She said you were the one who'd keep it standing," Mr. Levine said, tapping the paper gently. "I don't understand why she wouldn't tell anyone." "She said she didn't want to be talked out of it." That tracked. He handed me a key. "There may be items in the house she left for you." She was old-fashioned, didn't like to put everything on paper. That evening, I let myself into the house alone. The couch still had the dent from where she always sat. The curtains were drawn. I made tea the way she used to, even though I don't drink tea. Habit, I guess. Grief clings to muscle memory. I wandered to the sewing room, the smallest room in the house. It had always been her sanctuary. Piles of fabric, mason jars of buttons, the clunky old machine that smelled faintly of oil and lemon polish. I hadn't stepped foot in it in months. That's when I saw it. A small, locked filing cabinet in the corner. It hadn't been there before, at least not in my memory. The kind with 2 drawers and a little rust on the handle. I tried the keys Mr. Levine gave me. One clicked on the second try. Inside, a stack of receipts, several folders labeled in Grandma's spidery cursive, and a notebook with a cracked spine. I opened it. It wasn't a diary. It was more like a log. Notes about the house, when the roof was last repaired, how much she paid the plumber for the basement leak, where she hid the emergency money tin in the pantry, behind the fake can of lentils. But there were also lines that stood out. Diane tried to take the silver set again, claimed she needed it for safekeeping, left without asking. Sherry keeps suggesting we downsize and sell. Told her no. She didn't like that. Claire brings tulips every time. Says nothing, but notices everything. Reminds me of myself. I closed the notebook. My chest ached. This wasn't favoritism. It was recognition. Grandma had seen the fractures, the small thefts, the pressure to surrender pieces of herself before she was ready. And in me, she saw a steward, not a scavenger. I stayed in that room until the sun dipped below the window line, the air thick with dust and memory. The next morning, I woke to 3 missed calls. One from each aunt, and a text from Diane. "Lawyer says you're taking the house. I hope you're ready for this." That was the moment I realized this wasn't grief they were holding. It was resentment. I didn't respond to any of their messages. Not out of spite, but because I didn't trust myself not to say something that would make things worse. I wasn't raised to throw matches at dry fields, even when people handed me the matchbook. I was raised by women who bit their tongues until they bled. So I spent the next few days inside Grandma's house, cleaning, sorting, touching every corner as if I could memorize the shape of her absence. The air still smelled like cinnamon and floor polish. The clocks all still ticked. I found things I didn't expect. Tiny things, mundane and extraordinary. A lipstick she hadn't worn in years. Her wedding ring in a teacup. A letter, still sealed, with my name on it. The handwriting was hers, unmistakable. Round, slightly slanted, always in blue ink. I waited a full day before opening it. Inside were 3 sentences. "You've always understood quiet better than anyone. That's why this house needs you, not them. You won't let it get sold for parts." She'd underlined parts. I read those lines over and over, until they stopped feeling like praise and started feeling like a responsibility I didn't ask for. But I wasn't angry. Not with her. Grandma had lived her entire life surrounded by people who mistook presents for loyalty. Her daughters showed up for Sunday dinners but took her china when she wasn't looking. They called it managing her affairs when what they meant was preparing to divide them. Me? I brought groceries. I changed light bulbs. I didn't announce myself. And maybe that's what she trusted most. Still, knowing the truth didn't soften what came next. 3 days later, a letter arrived from a law firm, different from Mr. Levine's. The return address was Diane's town. Inside was a formal notice. They were contesting the will, on grounds of undue influence and lack of mental clarity at the time of revision. It was laughable, or it would have been if it hadn't made my stomach twist. I called Mr. Levine. "They've retained counsel," I said. He sighed. "Of course they have. Are you willing to fight this?" I didn't answer immediately, but when I thought about Grandma's letter, the quiet trust in those 3 short lines, I found my voice again. "Yes," he paused. "Then let's get to work." We combed through everything. Bank records, medical charts, witness statements from the notary, every receipt in that little filing cabinet. Mr. Levine built a folder the size of a phone book. Still, they pushed. Diane's lawyer filed an injunction to freeze the transfer of the deed. Sherry gave an interview to a local reporter. "We're just trying to protect our mother's legacy," she said tearfully, while sitting on a porch she hadn't cleaned in 5 years. And then, I found the recording. It was tucked into an envelope labeled July 12th, call with Claire. A cassette tape. I blinked. Grandma hadn't owned a cassette player in a decade. I went digging in the basement and found an old Walkman in a box of mismatched electronics. It still worked. I pressed play. Her voice came through, soft, shaky but firm. "Claire, I'm recording this so I don't forget what I said. You can toss it later. I want you to know I've decided to change the will. I didn't want to tell your aunts, not because I don't love them, but because they've made it clear what they're here for. You just come and see me. You bring peace into this house. That's why it should be yours. I want it to live." My hands shook, not from grief, from the weight of being chosen, from the sound of a woman who had never said much, saying everything. I gave the tape to Mr. Levine. He nearly choked. Claire, this changes everything." I nodded. "I know." The next step came fast, the financial ledger. It was one of the last things I'd checked, a little brown notebook wedged behind a row of mystery novels. Grandma had cataloged every expense she paid over the last 6 years, and in the margins she added notations. Loaned Sherry $1,200, never repaid, claimed it was a gift, told her no. Diane took $800 for roof work, hired her neighbor, pocketed $300. I saw the invoice. Claire bought paint for the porch, refused reimbursement. It was subtle, restrained, but clear. A pattern. It told a story none of them expected, a woman who saw more than she said. I sat with it all one evening, sipping lukewarm tea on the back steps. The garden was overgrown, but I could still see the shape of what it once was, rows of tulips, stone borders, a bench where Grandma liked to sit with a crossword. And I thought, they're not suing me for the house. Not really. They're suing me for not playing the part they wrote for me. The quiet niece, the background girl, the one who never asked for more. But Grandma had revised the script, and I was going to perform it exactly as written. The final piece came from an old family friend, Mrs. Patel, who'd lived 2 doors down since the 70s. She showed up on my porch with a tin of shortbread cookies and a file folder. "I thought you should have this," she said. "Your grandmother made me a copy of the notarized will. Just in case. Said she didn't trust the family not to twist things." Inside was a signed affidavit, notarized, confirming Grandma's full mental awareness and lack of outside influence during the change. Dated. Witnessed. I hugged Mrs. Patel before she left. She held me tighter than I expected. "Your grandmother trusted you," she whispered. And that meant something. I didn't cry, but something in my chest unclenched. Later that night, I placed the cassette tape in a sealed plastic sleeve and labeled it. Then I turned off the lights, locked the front door, and slept in Grandma's bed for the first time in my life. It didn't feel like trespassing. It felt like coming home. The courtroom wasn't grand. It was beige, tired, and full of echoes, just like every family that had ever come through it. I wore a navy blazer over a plain dress and sat next to Mr. Levine at the defendant's table. Across from us, Aunt Diane and Aunt Sherry whispered behind their lawyer's shoulder like 2 girls caught cheating on a test. Their expressions flipped between brittle confidence and strained sympathy, the kind reserved for people who still thought they could guilt me into stepping aside. The judge was calm, middle-aged, and clearly unimpressed by theatrics. "This is a straightforward matter," she said. "We are not here to relitigate emotions, only documents." That should have been the end of it, but my aunts had come prepared with their version of history. She wasn't well, Diane said, gripping a tissue like it was part of her case file. Our mother had memory issues. She forgot what day it was. She thought Claire was still a child. Their lawyer added, "We believe the decedent was manipulated, gently, perhaps unintentionally, into changing her final wishes." Mr. Levine stood. "We have notarized proof from an unaffiliated witness. We have a dated ledger maintained by the decedent herself, showing financial concerns regarding both plaintiffs. We also have a contemporaneous audio recording of her intentions." The courtroom stirred. The judge raised an eyebrow. "A recording?" Mr. Levine handed over a flash drive and a transcript. The judge didn't play it out loud. She read through the transcript with a stillness that made the room feel like it had stopped breathing. When she finished, she placed it on the bench. "There's no evidence of coercion," she said. "In fact, there is significant documentation of deliberate intent. Case dismissed." My aunts froze, not dramatically, not in horror, but like people who had truly convinced themselves they would win, because they always had. Outside the courthouse, the wind had picked up. I hugged my coat tighter and tried to ignore the buzz of reporters asking for comment. Diane caught up to me in the parking lot. "You think you're better than us?" she asked bitterly. "No," I said. "I think I was just quieter." She opened her mouth, closed it. "She always gave you more credit than you deserved. And you always gave her less." I turned away. I expected that to be the end of it. But 2 weeks later, Aunt Sherry showed up at the house. No warning, just knocked at the kitchen door like she had a right to. I let her in, out of curiosity more than grace. She looked thinner. The stress had carved out her face. "I brought banana bread," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "Seriously?" It was her favorite. I let the silence stretch. "I'm not here to fight," she added. "I just wanted to see it one more time." I gestured to the kitchen chair. "She hated that wallpaper," I said, pointing to the faded floral print. "Said it made her dizzy." Sherry smiled. "She told me once it was like being trapped in a doily. We sat, the bread sat between us. I didn't touch it." "She left it to you because you listened," Sherry said quietly. "I didn't. I was too busy assuming I'd already earned it." I nodded, unsure if this was an apology or a confession. "She asked me a month before she died if I thought you could handle it," she continued. I said yes. I didn't think much of it, just figured she was worried. "She wasn't," I said. "She was choosing." Sherry's eyes welled up. "I don't want the house." "Good," I said, "but I do want to help fix it." I looked at her carefully. "Not because I think I deserve it," she added quickly, "but because I think she'd want someone else to pull weeds with you." That made me pause. The garden had become my project. Every Saturday I trimmed and replanted, slowly reviving the space where Grandma used to sit and sip her tea with nothing but bees and birds for company. "Fine," I said. "You can come next week, bring gloves." She smiled. It wasn't a pretty smile. It was exhausted, but real. Over the next few months, things shifted. Aunt Diane stayed distant, sent a card with no message on my birthday. That was her olive branch. I didn't press for more. But Aunt Sherry showed up. She brought mulch. She replanted irises. She never asked to come inside unless I offered. And slowly, people stopped talking about the lawsuit and started asking how I managed to bring the peonies back to life. The neighbors returned. Mrs. Patel came every Sunday with lemon tea. A cousin I barely knew dropped off a bag of old photos he thought belonged somewhere here. I framed 3 of them and hung them by the staircase. One of Grandma in her garden, one of us baking something we'd burned, and one, taken without warning, of her sitting in the sewing room, notebook open, head bent in concentration. I found the notebook again last week, tucked it into a drawer beside my own. Sometimes I write next to her old lines, in different ink, but with the same hope. Today I pulled weeds by myself. Not for long. Sherry showed up. We didn't talk much, but it didn't feel quiet. The house isn't a shrine, it's a place again, a living thing, and when people pass it now they say, "That's Eleanor's place. Her granddaughter's fixing it up." Not inheriting, not clinging, fixing. The garden bloomed for the first time in years. I was kneeling near the fence, clearing out wild mint, when I heard gravel crunching on the driveway. I expected Aunt Sherry, but when I looked up, it was Aunt Diane, standing with a bakery bag in her hand and an expression I couldn't read. She wore beige slacks and a too-neat blouse. Not her usual style. She looked like someone dressing for a test she wasn't sure she'd pass. "I brought something," she said, walking slowly toward the porch. "Store-bought. I'm not much of a baker." I didn't get up. I noticed. She glanced at the bag. "Banana bread." Figured I'd keep the theme going. I stood and wiped my hands on my jeans. I didn't invite her in. She stayed on the porch step, awkward like she wasn't sure she belonged. "I know what you think of me," she said finally. "And I probably earned it." I didn't argue. She always said you had her eyes, Diane continued. I didn't see it then, but I do now. You don't flinch, even when people think you should. She saw more than anyone gave her credit for, I said. Diane's eyes dropped. She did. There was a pause, not uncomfortable, just full. I talked to Sherry, she added. She said you let her help in the garden. She didn't sue me, Diane flinched. Fair. She stepped forward and placed the bag on the railing. I didn't come to plead for anything, just to say I made a mess of grief and money and pride. You've always been good at certainty, I said, even when you were wrong. She nodded. It's a bad habit. I'm trying to break it. I leaned against the railing. Why now? She looked out over the flower beds. Because I realized I want to be remembered as someone who could change, not just someone who showed up with a list of what she was owed. I didn't forgive her, not right then, but I offered her a glass of lemonade. Inside, we sat at the kitchen table. She didn't touch the banana bread. Neither did I. But we talked. About Grandma. About the things we both remembered differently, and the ones we remembered the same. Diane cried once, quietly, when she told me she found one of Grandma's old scarves in a drawer and couldn't bring herself to throw it out. I told her I'd found a cassette tape of her voice. Played it twice. Couldn't play it again for a while. She looked at me then, not as an opponent, not even as her niece, as someone who'd inherited something heavier than a deed, and chose to carry it anyway. 2 weeks later, I hosted dinner. Nothing fancy, just a pot roast, some roasted vegetables, and lemon pie I hadn't made from scratch. Sherry came first, arms full of wildflowers and a potted basil plant. Diane came late. She brought new dish towels and didn't complain about the gravel parking. We ate in Grandma's dining room, the one they hadn't sat in together for years. After dessert, Diane stood and looked around the room. It looks like her, she said softly, but warmer. She always wanted color in here, I said. She just didn't want to hear the comments. Sherry grinned. Well, you can deal with us now. I nodded. Later, as they left, Diane lingered at the door. Do you need help fixing the upstairs window? She asked. I blinked. Yes. I can send someone, she said. Or come next weekend, if you'll have me. I didn't say yes, but I left the porch light on. Inside, I sat down at the kitchen table alone. The banana bread was still on the counter. I cut a slice. It was dry, but I ate it anyway, because sometimes apology isn't sweet. But it's still a start. The house breathes differently now. There's laughter in the hallway sometimes, from nieces and cousins who visit without needing an excuse. The sewing room is still full of fabric, but it also holds a narrow writing desk where I keep the ledger, now filled with my own notes. Things like, April 9th, new tulip bulbs took, fence still leaning east. I leave the back window cracked on cool mornings. The scent of earth and tea floats in if I sit still enough. Sometimes I imagine Grandma sitting across from me, one hand on her cup, one eyebrow raised in approval. I haven't touched the cassette tape again. It's tucked in a drawer with the will, the letter, and a folded-up napkin with Diane's sloppy apology scrawled in pen. I don't need to replay it. I carry her words differently now, like an anchor I chose, not one I inherited. People still whisper when I show up at family events. Some think I manipulated an old woman. Others think I won a battle I didn't fight loud enough. Let them. I don't need to be vindicated in every mouth. I have the truth and I have the deed. More than that, I have a garden that grows again, a family that remembers how to reach for one another, and a porch light that stays on longer than it used to. Some legacies are written in ink and filed in court. Others bloom silently from the hands that stayed. At night, when I close the curtains and lock the door, I pass the photo of Grandma in her garden. She's smiling at something you can't see in the frame. Now I think I know what it was. And as I whisper goodnight, I finally mean it. I kept it safe. Just like you asked.